And welcome to the Big Gunner Podcast. Well, we get ready for OTAs, which start today. A lot going to be happening there. And we're going to start off right away with the most important position in our franchise. And right now, Brian Dable and Joe Shane's careers with the Giants, I guess, is all of a sudden sitting down on what happens in the quarterback room. So we all know about Jaxson Dart. We all know the effort that Brian Dable is going to put in him to get him into the system. The big question is, how soon are we going to get him in the game this year? And I don't know. I feel comfortable with Russell Wilson at quarterback. I would even feel comfortable if we had to go to Jameis Winston if it was early on, if there was an early injury and they didn't feel Dart was ready. But the big factor is going to be, and you're going to know prior to week one, exactly how far in the development of Jaxson Dart that Brian Dable has confidence in his ability to put him on the field. That's really what it's going to come down to. You know, the one thing that he offers us that the other two guys don't is extreme mobility, athleticism to get away from rushers, probably even make moves in open space to create yardage. And again, I think one of the great topics I've always discussed with some real hardcore fans is how many third downs can you convert with your feet as a quarterback? It used to be a huge asset for Russell Wilson. Never so much for Jameis, although I've seen him do it, but Russell Wilson early on in his career did. I just don't know that he's got that mobility anymore. I didn't really see it with Pittsburgh. I thought he got in trouble hanging in, having to stay in the pocket. I don't think he's got that ability, that spurt ability to avoid, that quickness to get rid of to avoid these deep, younger pass rushers now. So I think it'll come down to how well our line holds up. But the real buzz is going to be about where Dart is. His rookie camp was very impressive, according to people who saw, and how much can we get as we move forward in this. But today it starts, May 27th, OTA starts, so we'll see when he gets everybody in camp, everybody who's going to participate gets around him. We'll see if it exudes confidence and get him go. And then it's going to be how far into the season do we go with him? You know, I mean, it's probably, I would say hopefully it's toward later in the season if we do have to. In a perfect world, we're having a great season with Russell Wilson. He could sit the whole year, and Wilson takes us to a division title. Wishful thinking, of course, but that would be the ideal situation. The longer we can go without him. But again, this decision is going to be a big one. And I think if we struggle early, and the schedule looks like it's possible, that's where I think we're going to have the issues with where Dart comes in. So my thought process would be probably around week 10 or 11. When if we're out of it, we're out of it. If we're 4-7 and we realize it's not due, we're going to we go and make that move toward them. The end of the year schedule seems a little bit more easier for development. The start of the schedule would be tough. I think if he has an unbelievable camp and Dable thinks that Dart can go week one, which I think would be highly unlikely. But if it does happen, it must mean that we got something. That's the only thing I can think of. But the big factor is Brian Dable knows he's got to win football games, and he's going to put the best guy at that position to win. You know, I think Wilson will be out there week one. I think he'll be out there considerably, at least for the month of September, if not October. Now it's important that he builds a chemistry with his offensive guys during this time, this crucial time now leading into week one and the preseason games. I don't think he'll play much during the preseason games. I think we'll see Winston, DeVito, and Dart mostly. But I know that he'll probably get a series or two, you know, and maybe the second game or the third game. Probably most likely, I think it's the second game that they'll probably put him more toward there. And I think you get a lot out of these practices now. Basically, it's a 7-on-7 type thing where it's just getting comfortable with your receivers is what really part. And then you have what Jameis Winston brings in. You know, he's obviously going to be fun for that quarterback room. Obviously, he's a character and probably great for the locker room. You know, if Wilson doesn't get it done, what happens early on? Is it Winston or Dart? You know, that's going to be the interesting, a little competition going on in camp to see what happens. And then also the possibility of moving Winston. You know, if someone wants him, is he worth a 6th or 7th round pick to get a little value back? If somebody has an injury, you know, like New Orleans had Derek Carr retire, so they were going with some young quarterbacks. Maybe he's comfortable down there. He's been with them, although it's a new coach, new system now. But I mean, he's comfortable in New Orleans. Maybe that's a spot for him. And then we got to get to the play calling. You know, does Brian Dable call the plays this year? For me, I wouldn't mind him going back to Mike Kafka. I think it's very important that he gauge the mental part of this team. I think he's probably got to engage more on the defensive side of the ball. maybe helping the players on the sidelines a little bit more than just really calling plays. I think it was a good idea, maybe after the non-successful 23 campaign, to come back. But Kafka did a good job in 22 when we made the playoffs. I don't have a problem with him calling plays. I thought it was a good move, but it didn't seem to create anything better offensively last year. We were basically put up the same numbers. So maybe take that pressure off the head coach, knowing what he's going through, knowing how important it is to win, engage the entire roster instead of just sitting there calling plays. My thought, I just think it might not be bad to give Mike Kafka that control. And then, if we could look at some things, I look at, going after, seeing Dart playing this year. I would say hopefully no would be in a perfect world, but I got a sneaky suspicion if he plays well in preseason and he looks good in practices, very similar to Patrick Mahomes' situation, and only comparing the ability how the Chiefs felt like after week 10 that they wanted to get him on the field. Hence, even though they won their division and had the number one overall seed in the conference, Mahomes' rookie year, the Chiefs did. They unloaded Alex Smith the next year, and went right to Mahomes, and you see how that's worked out. So hopefully, maybe it's something like that we get in the future like this. But either way, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the quarterback room. Some other things that we want to focus on. Is probably some of the position battles, and some of them that come out is going to be on the offensive line, which I think is the most important position group I think we have. We are now seeing that right now it looks like Evan Neal is going to take a shot at guard. I think it's the right move. Although he didn't play poorly and he graded out okay, playing right tackle when he came in late in the season, I just look at him like he might be better suited for guard, because I know the Giants are looking with their last salary cap money to make a move, maybe get a guard in there. But remember that they went back and brought in most of the players that were on last year's offensive line, so they must feel comfortable in that position. We drafted Mabo, who we know about, and there's potential there. We think that probably maybe he could challenge for a starting position at some point this season. That would be great. He adds depth for our line, which I know we need. What it really comes down to is Andrew Thomas. It's got to be. I've said it numerous times. I'm not going to stop talking about it. We have to have him on the field. So almost more importantly than wins and losses early on, it's going to be how the offensive line protects the continuity. They were pretty good last year up until Thomas's injury, and then trying to keep these guys healthy. That's the most important factor that we have. And also it'd be interesting to see what we do with Abdul Carter's versatility. Can he play stand up? Is he going to play with a 3-point stance, hand in the ground? All those different ways we can move him around. Does he even come inside a little bit and play? Where does he fit in? What we want to do? That's going to be a really interesting situation to see what we can do, how creative we can be with Abdul Carter. I think he's going to offer us a really strong edge. I think our defensive front arguably could be one of the better ones in the league. And I think that's kind of where I look at it as far as what we're going to do with him. Also, I like what we've done in the secondary. I think having Nubin, get him healthy, and have him next to Jaron Hollins only going to help him get better. I thought he was probably one of our best, most effective secondary people. Getting Paulson Adebo in from New Orleans gives us strength at the corner. We have our number one corner now. The secondary is going to be better. And once again, they have to create turnovers. We have to do something. I think the combination of the pass rush and the secondary should create turnovers this year that I think is going to help our offense create some field position advantages. And I think these are the big factors. And again, stay healthy in those positions. The tight end room is very interesting. The Thomas Fedone, and we had Greg Dulcich. Both guys can, Fedone we don't know much about, but Dulcich played a little bit in this league. Was with Denver for a while. And we still have the three guys in there. So we're going to have some good competition at tight end. Hopefully someone emerges with Theo Johnson to give us some offensive threat. And then we had, of course, the defensive front. We're adding Darius Alexander, Ray Harris, and Charles C. Golston should help the interior of the line. So our defensive front has to be one of the best in the league and needs to be an upgrade, better play, and again, of course, stay healthy. So I think leading into all this, where we're at with the team it all is going to come down to where we get out with this schedule. To me, you got to look at. We have one of the toughest schedules in the league. We heard someone say they want to eliminate divisions. just because of how hard our schedules become. That to have the third the third pick of the draft and have the toughest schedule probably isn't fair, but we're gonna have to get it going. So I'm gonna go back again to go back to the 1984 season, which I talked about last week. The two games that we had that year were Philly and Dallas. We had them at home. I think it set the precedent for the season. Like I said, it told Bill Parcells when I talked about at that point how he needed to get off to a good start. And I think this is going to be a definite 1-1 start. We're going to have to steal one of these games on the road just to keep the fan base going. 0-2 start in the division would be a tough pill to swallow. I wasn't really thrilled with opening both those two games on the road, then having two, AFC West opponents coming back home in Kansas City and the LA Chargers in week 3 and 4. So I kind of thought that, it was kind of, a real tough situation for us to get the start that we're going to have. But 2-2 start would be pretty cool because that would be what we at least need. Perfect world 3-1 would be great. The Sunday night game against Kansas City is sandwiched. I think they have Philadelphia the next week, so who knows what they're feeling. Or Philadelphia, I think they go. I'm mistaken. I think Philadelphia is week 2, and they're coming off a Philly win, which maybe who knows where their mind's going to be when they come and play us. But again, the schedule's going to be tough, and then we go to Denver in week 5, and then Philly home in week 6. So, I mean, this is no easy task. I think New Orleans week 5. Let me get that straight. New Orleans, I think, is week 5. Then Philly, and then Denver, and then Philly again. So, these first, 8 games are going to be brutal. And it's going to, if we can get off 3-5, 4-4, it'll keep the base and the players going that we still have a chance for something. That would be the hope. And, anything more than that would be just a real bonus to the start of the season. So then, the rookies, getting the rookies in there to see what happens, that would be a key part. Where does Carter fit in? How do we do, Scottaboo? I think he's going to help the running game. Big runner inside, breaking tackles. I think it'll take some pressure off Tracy. What do we get out of Dart? Alexander. All these players that we need. That goes. That when they need to get some production. Off the draft. Just the real key is going to be is how the top 3, picks in this draft, come out and play. Dart's going to, we're going to see Dart later in the season. I'm guessing. The only time I think it would come earlier is if things have really become a disaster, and Dable's just got to show that he needs a spark. And if Dart can win games in the middle of the schedule and get the fan base group going, that could also see the development of Dart and him excelling play would keep Brian Dable around for another year. The big thing is with our schedule is having the finish that we do. We have a couple games that are gettable late in the season, so we'll see what happens. And then you see how we did with the class and free agents. Do these guys come in and have an impact? That's going to be what the other parts of this is going to be. Is how these players come in and adapt. To working with the Giants team, coaches, players around, what leadership we have in the locker room. I go back to the addition of Darius Slayton. We paid Darius Slayton big number. We're paying him $12 million per. And I think it is a combination of how good he's been for us as well as the locker room type of character he is. High character guy, and I like him a lot. And I think that's going to be what we see and, going into the locker room. So this is where rookies are going to go. We're going to get a real good feel. Our secondary, Corey Black, was a good corner that makes plays on the ball. We drafted him in the 7th round at Oklahoma State. I think Marcus Mubo will help us in play. And then we got to look into where, are we going to make hits on all these guys? Hopefully we don't have any misses. We've been struggling in free agency, in the past, decade with making guys that we bring in that don't miss. And 2 to come to mind are obviously Kenny Galladay and the left tackle from New England. I forget his name, but they probably he should. Nate Solder, So these are the things that are happening. So as we get into the season, it's going to be a lot of fun. I think, I really think that the preseason is going to tell us. I think we have 3 games. We have the Jets New England and Buffalo, I believe, are 3 preseason games. I think that's going to be telling to see where we are after those games, and hopefully we have good OTAs in the mini camp and we get a good feel. No injuries, none of these non-contact, ligament injuries. We don't need any of that, as we come forward. So that being said, we'll come back to you next week a little bit more. Now to the NBA playoffs. Big game last night for OKC. Streak continues. OKC doesn't cover. They're now 0-7 against the number in the in the playoffs. But the teams that have won Game 3 down 2-0 are now 0-7 in Game 4. So tonight is the same scenario. You have the Indiana Pacers win 2 games, are up 2-0. The Knicks steal a game. Amazing finish on Sunday as Karl Anthony Towns puts up a Michael Jordan-esque performance to carry the Knicks on their back, maybe shades of Patrick Ewing in the heydays of the Knicks, and then he ends up coming out and pulling the Knicks through to make it 2-1. But I just have to say that this is going to be a tough night for the Knicks. I just think Indiana got a little lucky. I think their adjustments were made when new guys came in on the court that they didn't really expect to see play. And I think the foul trouble kind of took them out of their game. They were up 20 in the second quarter. I think you lose that edge. And then when you see Karl Anthony Towns, what he was capable of in that fourth quarter, you feel the noose tightening on these guys. And that's what happens. The pressure on these young players today to get wins and perform, and social media, I think, is one of the psychological disadvantages to trying to close out games. You see it in most all these games. All these teams have that issue where they struggle. Either they're getting really blown out or they're struggling to close games. So I'm going with the Pacers tonight, just because I just think that they have a real chance to get this done. And I picked them in the series. Don't want to root against my Knicks. Lifelong Knicks fan. Always have them in the back of my heart, even though I live down here in South Florida now, and I've turned a little bit more allegiance to the Miami Heat. But you just don't forget your roots and where you came from, and it's hard to root against them. But we'll see what happens. I'm not rooting against them, but I'm just thinking that it's going to be a tough night. But I think they go win Game 5, and then it's going to come down to a Game 6. Can the Knicks come back from 3-1? Why not? Get the Garden electric. At least we got a Game 5 at the Garden, which is great for the New York, basketball fans, and the energy around the fan base in the city has just been really fun to watch. So go get them, Knicks. I think you got a tough task ahead. In the hockey, Edmonton, boy, I'll tell you, coming out after that 3-0 win and then put it on them in Game 3. I just see that the goalie edge, which I thought Ottinger was the better goalie coming into than Skinner with Picard hurt. Now I'm not so sure. I think Edmonton puts you on your heels. I think Dallas really played well, but got caught there with that late goal in the second period when they dominated the second period on Sunday, and then with 18 seconds left, McDavid scored to go up 3-1. Let's look at it like I think Edmonton's just a team of destiny. I think we're really destined for a rematch of the finals of last year. I think the Panthers, who lost last night 3-0, typical form of a playoffs. It's just so hard to close out a team in the NHL. It's just that's what you saw. So I think the Panthers go on the road for Game 5. But I really like Edmonton in this spot tonight. I think very similar to the Knicks series. I think Edmonton gets a win tonight, and I think come down to both the Dallas and the Knicks trying to save off elimination at home in Game 5s. So we're going to go with Dallas tonight. In the baseball, kind of like the San Diego Padres. They're low numbers. Last night they pulled out a hard-fought 11-inning win over the Marlins. I kind of like the Mets should get their bats back after that emotional series against the Dodgers. Struggled to a 2-1 win yesterday. I think the Mets should be okay tonight, in their game. And I kind of like the Diamondbacks. The Pirates struggling on the road. Diamondbacks get a win last night, 5-0. I think they continue getting home cooking. So that's what we got for you today. We'll be back next week after the Giants get this minicamp. Hopefully there's no major story of an injury. Hopefully there's a lot of good stories about who looks good and where we're going. Keep it positive, Giant fans. Season's only a couple months away. Go Blue.